Please welcome our keynote speaker, Katherine Forster. Katherine Forster is the Executive Director of the Green Digital Finance Alliance, a member of the EU EIT Food Supervisory Board, and co-lead of UNFCCC Global Innovation Hub Cities Working Group and the UNEP Digital Circular Economy Lab. As a former Canadian diplomat, she has been spearheading impact innovation for 30 years, including roles with the Climate KIC, FIDES Microfinance, and award-winning digital innovation startups and accelerators. She has also served as Sharper to the UN Secretary General Task Force on Digital Finance and as an advisor for the World Bank Carbon Markets Blockchain Pilot and the Bank of International Settlement Project's Genesis Digital Green Bonds Report.
Distinguished guests, honorable members of the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development and government participants, fellow participants, and esteemed colleagues. Indeed, our purpose today is profound: to discuss, collaborate, and propel the energy and minerals sector forward in Uganda to meet the climate and SDG agendas together while we do so. I'm honored to be here with you and to share some experience from my 30-plus years of a career to highlight the transformative power of innovation, of local contextualized solution building, capacity building, collaboration, and sustainable finance in driving impactful change. I would like to start by just highlighting some key personal, professional background that have served me in this path, and then share highlights from the larger ecosystem as well as GDFA. So I will share my screen now. I come from originally from Canada, but now from Switzerland. I have a background that was informed by geography, including geology, geographic information systems, and science. And my initial project was on looking at Hydro-Quebec James Bay, and then early GIS for resource community assessment. But at the time, academia wasn't ready for this type of cross-siloed, cross-sectoral work. So I left my doctoral work and joined the Canadian Foreign Service, where I worked on NAFTA, climate, and human security in the 1990s, including under Kofi Annan's peace-building processes and the Kimberley Diamond process. And then when Canada left Kyoto and human security, I left Canada and I went to Switzerland, where I began international collaborations, as mentioned, with Swiss science institutions, setting up the first Namibia Microfinance Bank, the World Bank, the UN Secretary General Task Force, and a number of other initiatives, including startups working on energy and natural resources. This early work I mentioned because it gave me this broad insight, lateral insight into negotiation processes, trade policies, community stakeholder engagement, the financing, the monitoring, reporting, and verification issues, the certification issues around siloed solution gaps, the physical, the digital, the data, the policy, and moreover, the need for homegrown, contextualized, integrated local solutions and skills development across policy, through to technology, through to the actual physical infrastructure. I am now for the last year and a half and previously working with the GDFA, currently as the executive director. And the Green Digital Finance Alliance, GDFA, is a Swiss-based not-for-profit that enables and co-creates digital financing innovation for climate and SDG challenges, which is a broad, sweeping statement, but it actually started very concretely out of some new emerging technologies in 2014-15, including ant forest, China's preeminent digital fintech initiative by Jack Ma and Alibaba and Ant Group. So it came out of this background, but combined with the UNEP and the World Bank inquiry into designing a sustainable financial system, this evolved and was launched in 2017 at the World Economic Forum. And for the first few years, when I served as CIO, we actually were Sherpa to the task force, really helping with the policy and actually starting doing experimentation and building out tools and resources. And of course, providing those key recommendations to the task force reports, People's Money. And since taking over as executive director in 2022, I have focused on more of a lab and demonstrator approach. So you can see some of our initiatives online, a lot of thought leadership, a lot of advisory for the G20, the UN, etc. But then we started building out actual tools and frameworks and pilots and demonstrators. And these were really important to really proving the case and to getting over that initial hype of fintech and digital innovation to really proving use cases and integrating local stakeholders. And this is the lab approach that I currently have in place. I've been working on for a number of years, even before when in my previous roles with the EU's largest innovation community, Climate Kick. And this lab approach is both for policy as well as for practical solutions and is cross-thematic and cross-regional. So it's the agility in that lab approach that is and demonstrator approach that has allowed us to really dive in very quickly to bring in stakeholders and sort of build out specific innovations and open platforms. So we have a digital aggregated green bonds for community aggregating community projects. We have sort of a model that is building out of our initial toolbox that was then taken up by the Bank of International Settlement. And then we also have sustainable cities and moreover energy communities, as well as natural capital, biodiversity, and agriculture. And moreover, we actually co-create. We cannot do this alone. We're a very small NGO and get project funding. So I've been working with the UNFCCC Global Innovation Hub and a broader ecosystem of collaborators to actually focus on these themes and to build out those pilots and demonstrators and frameworks. And some examples, as you've already seen on that initial slide, include readiness and classification frameworks, green bond toolbox that can be used and integrated for local contacts and stakeholders, an innovation management tracker, and the innovation passports for solutions, as well as something called the Encyclopenergy. And this is a crowdsourced and open source catalog of energy efficient enablers. And I mention these because it is this type of toolbox that helps bring cross stakeholder, cross community, cross research capacity together, including on policies, to really help focus and share in a very contextualized way. And these have been used across regions and across sectors globally. And some highlights that I think are relevant today includes the UNFCCC Global Innovation Hub, where we worked, I co-led the cities and energy theme, and also worked on the BC, British Columbia and Canada mines traceability pilot. And we are now, GDFA is now focusing on energy communities in Canada, which are locally contextualized communities, and circular and sustainable city demonstrators. And through this, we're creating those open platforms and tools and those community-based models. And the focus here is data-driven, of course, but I really highlight the need for local and contextualized knowledge, because a data-driven focus can be exclusive as well and create more of a digital divide. So it's really important to ensure the local capacity building and local knowledge is transferred into these higher tech solutions, because we see across sectors there's a lot of assumptions about data readiness. And it is the monitoring, reporting, and verification side that's really important here. I just wanted to highlight that Energy Minds Digital Trust Pilot, which you can find online. I had a very small role in this, but I want to highlight some good practices, because this was, again, under the umbrella of the United Nations Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. And with the amazing British Columbia Ministry and experts, we sort of did a pilot on a digital trust ecosystem between organizations, business, and individuals. And initially, this was looked at sort of internally, not cross border, but with the issues around sourcing minerals and sourcing fuels and the new policies in the EU, this part of it, I think, was an essential element. But it was about technology, sort of bringing technology to industry specific regulations, helping to identify best practices, creating a highly replicable framework that can be scaled globally. And they prioritize the use of interoperability technology, processes, and data standards so that we could overcome those barriers to adoption, encourage the uptake of new tools, but also address things like varied reporting standards, diverse regulatory models, and the lack of data or integrated standardized data and digital tools. And this improved the method for exchanging data that allowed governments and organizations to share certificates, permits, and other data security issues, and to streamline the processes to improve the efficiency and reduce risk. It also helped us provide trustworthy and transparent information to the interested parties. So this is continuing. I'm no longer involved in that, but I really encourage you to look at that best practice. And I think one element that for me is important too is what we're now focusing on at GDFA is a new project being led out of British Columbia again, and we're the international partner. And this is the Accelerating Community Energy Transformation, ACET, with partners across academia and most importantly, First Nations, community-led, plus private, public, and not-for-profit organizations, including GDFA. And I mention this because we often talk about global north and global south issues, but this demonstrates some of the capacity and the innovations that are building out in the global north, but with those types of communities that face some similar challenges. So these communities lie outside major metropolitan areas, and they rely on diesel for electricity to power their everyday life. And through this collaboration, we're working with the communities themselves to define their energy needs as along with their economic, social needs, health, culture, etc. And so as the partners, we're helping to identify the pathways and implement the energy infrastructure, as well as the business models and finances that will help them benefit the health, environment, and society generally. And that net zero energy system it's more than just respecting the environment. So it's also about the storage, the distribution, and the financing that goes back into the community, including the services that they determine they need. And so GDFA is leading on the finance model and the innovation needed, both low and high tech, and the integration across those. And we hope that this serves as a model of how to power those communities and demonstrate that capacity. I also wanted to highlight some of the two other models and tools that I think could be useful and I'm interested in addressing here. And that is what started in 2018 as a sort of blockchain for digital green bonds toolbox. And there it was more about addressing the efficiencies of large scale innovations, large scale energy infrastructure, for example, looking at the issuance, but also on the monitoring, reporting, and verification. And what we've done over the years, and what I've done both with GDFA and other organizations, is use this to demonstrate how we can aggregate smaller infrastructure, smaller investable projects, everything from smallhold farmers to small energy, solar and wind, et cetera, into aggregated investments. And this has been taken up by the Bank of International Settlement. And we're now looking at engaging this model with carbon forward element for the digital green bonds. So we'll be investigating that going forward as well. And again, the key is working with the stakeholders. And then again, something that we found very useful across our EU and international projects was while we were looking at the innovative business models and finance models, and these aren't revolutionary, it's often about data to unlock existing finance models for community stakeholders, community associations, and even individual homeowners or SMEs. It's about finding the right data to unlock the right business models for those financing solutions and working with regulatory frameworks while also helping to inform new ones. So this has been a really important example of the type of open sourced and open source platform that could be integrated and scaled. Finally, I just want to say that this to me is a really important approach for innovation, for sustainable finance and integrated solutions, particularly in the energy and mining areas, is that co-creation and demonstration to enable and work with existing policy and governance to address the monitoring, reporting, and verification needs that we've seen from very early days and the lessons I learned with the Kimberley Diamond process, and to have the contextualized approaches that enable what I call the 4Gs, geographic, gender, generational, and groups of stakeholders to be involved to increase the capacity building on the ground as well. So I would like to say that the common elements and any recommendations I would humbly offer from that, overarching experience is just that the systems innovation approach, it's about the process and the co-creation, finding your entry point into addressing the issues that we know we're facing. Having those community-centric models where possible or stakeholder-centric models, integrate locally and relevant technology. We can't assume that a top-down approach, a solution that's built in California might work in Uganda. That we have to ensure that the technology is either evolves or is born out of the local context. And that also is true of the business models. The new business models for how to engage and have the finance focus and evolve into community benefits is really important. And that includes the financial mechanisms that can be unleashed or harnessed, both incumbent and new innovative financial mechanisms, as well as the digital and data infrastructure. Working on those from the start in any new project and existing projects, using standardization is really important. Connecting and emerging proven platforms are both available. And then to have that type of toolbox or demonstrator approach, it's a lower risk approach. I noted the example of the current pilot that's underway. That is the way that we find to really unlock innovation and ensure that the stakeholder processes, as well as policy engagement and evolution is possible. With that, I would just like to say that, by embracing the innovation, empowering communities, and redefining the financial landscapes internally as well as externally, we can create this legacy of positive change. We can catalyze impact on climate and sustainable development while upscaling and evolving our energy and mineral capacities to the benefit of all. With that, I say thank you. Asante sana.
Thank you very much, Katherine Foster, for that keynote address. If you could kindly stay online and see whether we can take some questions from the audience. I can see that Canadians have taken over. You're Canadian over there. We have Canadians here. And but we're ready for questions for Katherine. You have one?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Katherine, hi. This is David Afungi. First of all, thanks for a brilliant presentation and that nice local tilt at the end with the Asante Sana. Some may say Weberlenyo here, but well done. I think there's, as I mentioned, I think at the beginning, is that there's an interesting sandwich between our conversation right now and what happened at the African Climate Summit in September. And obviously, I think next week or the week after, there's the COP28 discussion. And I think one of the main principles speaks to that sort of end of the energy pyramid specifically. If you're to provide some advice on the back of the work that you've done in your presentations, what kind of narrative or what should we be insisting on in terms of making sure that the energy transition that we're speaking about is just on one hand, but also speaks to that last mile consumer? I think Humphrey spoke earlier about electrification rates. Not that stellar right now, but we can only do it if we have a component of off-grid power, but the financing mechanism is quite key. So I thought I'll just pick your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that question and for the opportunity to address you. Again, I'm quite the generalist, so please take my any recommendations I give with that in mind. Because I think, generally the focus in the past has been on investment in grid infrastructure and the fact that we have, in Global North and in the models of the past, sort of the business and corporate and infrastructure in place or financing in place. And so addressing that energy infrastructure and energy transition really needs to be contextualized, and that means, and this is where I've worked on a number of pilots, both on solar and wind, and how to and other types of renewable energy resources, and even my former colleague worked on the Cook Stove project in Uganda. And what we learned, I think, is that that renewable energy integration can happen through the digital infrastructure. So you can have small installations without having to have the big physical integrated infrastructure. It's more about having the digital infrastructure. And that, of course, also means the connectivity issues have to be addressed, which is hopefully a smaller infrastructure gap to address than anything. And then the collaborations around the finance models really can be taking place if you can bring in the financial institutions, the government, the rating agencies, the data experts, to really find that model that can aggregate the impact and align that with the projects from different regions. These can be integrated into an investable product, but you do need some champions to actually get that started. So, it's really a chicken and egg problems of where do you start in that systems innovation. The models are there, some of the stakeholders are there. It's really about doing that stakeholder mapping and really understanding the context of where to go and what is needed in terms of the data and the financing that you have in place, and how to ramp that up through that systemic contextualized approach.
Okay, I think from me, I have one simple question. I need some bit of explanation on it. I notice here you are an advisor to the World Bank on blockchain for carbon credits. How does that work? I wanted to find from you.
Oh, I think you have experts in the room that could actually answer that directly over your conversations. But this was in the early days of blockchain, where there was a lot of assumptions about the technology and the readiness of the technology. However, we have now advanced, and we've gone through some periods of hype and different types of business models. But for carbon markets, what we know, some of the key challenges around carbon markets, and that goes for any I think resource natural development approach, is the monitoring, reporting, and verification. The World Bank blockchain was a huge collaboration with early innovators in blockchain, but also in data science, also on carbon markets, addressing the identified challenges, duplication, data relevance, data issues, are they reflecting the real impact or not? And then sort of enabling the capacity to have transparency on the interactions of the carbon credits and the verification of those carbon credits. The report is available online, but the overarching infrastructure was addressing some of the key challenges that we saw and still see in carbon markets, and that is the credibility issues, the duplication, the double counting, and issues of monitoring, reporting, and verification. So it really tried to address key elements of that, and there was a pilot that actually happened that proved the case. But what we've seen since then is a number of startups like Triangle and Evercity and others that have created platforms for those carbon credits to be exchanged and for new carbon forwards to actually start evolving as well, with the real impact being integrated into the certificate.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any further comments or questions from the audience? I don't see any, so I think I want to thank, where? There's one? Oh, there's one here. Can I give the mic to him?
Engineer Willy Mumaso David, Minister of Energy and Mineral Development is my name. I've been listening to her presentation, and I was wondering how the digital technology can be actually integrated in the business models. Many of our businesses start, and the big question which is usually asked is, where can I get the financing for my projects? And many presentations are made to financing partners, and the first instinct is that, is it feasible? So how do we integrate these financing solutions into the business models from the start, so that it's not about waiting for a finished project and then financing is here? Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that very relevant question. I think this is where the landscape process begins, by looking at the current business funding options available, whether they be grants, whether they be venture capital, whether through incubator, if you're talking about startups and SMEs. For larger projects, of course, that's a new level. So this is where, with Encyclope Energy, we have a couple of categories, and that model can be transferred. So from a government perspective, this could be a very useful tool to create, where you have that type of platform that outlines all of the platforms that are available, all of the grants that are available. And it's an evolving, living platform. And it's also crowdsourced, so that you have different stakeholders, including those in the room, that have knowledge about the different options available to the different types of projects that are being initiated. And some of those do release the funding up front, so that could be part of it. So this is what GDFA does, is actually look at that overarching infrastructure and then dives in and pilots one based on the leverage room available. I also suggest that here the project must already have in place an understanding of the data that would be available for decision making. So, and it doesn't have to be very high-tech data, just understanding how the performance will be tracked, what the capacity will be, and how that will be measured. And then looking to the public-private partnerships here, where you don't have just one core top-down partner that is making all the decisions, having that integrated model, even with community support, and finding resources within there. So I think there's 3 layers to the answer I have for you. But in terms of actually finding the funding, this is something I think we all struggle with, and this is why we share the common knowledge. But formalizing that sharing capacity is just as important as sharing the technology as well.
Okay. There being no further questions or comments, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Katherine Foster for the excellent presentation. On behalf of the organizers and the audience here, we thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
I now hand over the mic back to the curator, that is Mr. Fungi.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks again, Katherine. So we, on account of whether we're running a little bit late, so I just propose that we try and get a short coffee, a short break, stretch our legs a little bit. And interestingly, what some of the points she made, Katherine, our keynote, made, segue to the next 2 presentations that we have, Mr. Chair. One from the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda that is busy putting that foundational funding, particularly for the smaller and medium-sized businesses. And then UNCDF, my brother Joe Mundoa, karibu sana. We'll talk about the initiative on clean energy work in Uganda, specifically around supporting last mile clean energy access and implementation of parish model. And I'll implore Joe for you to track down Katherine and see how we can embed some of those learnings into the good work that you're doing. So we'll take a break now and perhaps reconvene in 15. Asante. And I think during the interlude, there'll be some videos playing. There's another partner out in Scotland that's has some interesting technology, but yeah, and network as well. Thank you.